What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of People Management Digest. My name is Lucas Pesa, and today I'm very excited because we'll be speaking to Stephen Fitzgerald, the president of Habanero Consulting Group, about a policy of non-policy, a sort of culture of accountability, and the nuances that have to do with that. So carrying on the sort of conversation that we've been having on the podcast a little bit in recent episodes. One of the things I find interesting about getting different perspectives on this subject is that all of the folks that I've been speaking to, they all have very unique perspectives on how to implement a policy of non-policy, the nuances that organizations need to be aware of, and everyone provides really unique insights. So make sure you stick around for this one. Stephen is going to talk to us a little bit about the importance of fast failing, how self-forming teams and the role that they can play in organizations, innovation levels and creativity levels, and essentially how not only leaders but other employees all have ownership of their own engagement levels and ownership of their own accountabilities, and how that whole conversation can really benefit an organization as it tries to move forward in the market. So this is going to be a great conversation. I really enjoyed talking to Stephen on this one, so make sure you stick around for the whole thing and enjoy the interview. How's it going, guys, and welcome back to People Management Digest. My name is Lucas Pesa, and today I'm joined by Stephen Fitzgerald, CEO of Habanero Consulting. How you doing today, Stephen?
I'm great, thank you, Lucas.
All right, so it's good to hear. So today, obviously, with the context that you'll be participating with us in our conference in April, you'll be speaking on a panel discussion about the benefits of a sort of policy of non-policy, and the sort of the benefits and the intricacies of creating a corporate culture of accountability and flexibility, those different things. One question that I wanted to open up with you is, because obviously whenever managers are putting together styles of management, and when they're trying to get a sense for what their employees benefit best from, what kind of management style is best, from an overall perspective, there's a real, sometimes managers like to get a sense of what they're dealing with before they get into sort of finding out what styles are best. So one thing I wanted to ask you was, what are the circumstances that typically hinder innovation amongst employees?
Yeah, innovation is a really interesting topic, and I think one of the things to get super clear on is that innovation flows from experimentation around hypotheses. Innovation isn't just ideation. It's not about coming up with cool ideas. The yield from innovation comes from the experimentation. And so when you are asking what hinders innovation, one of the big things is organizations that don't have the ability to allow people to fail. I'm reminded of, I can't remember the exact, there's a lot of varying views, but they say Edison failed between 1,000 and 5,000 times on the way to inventing the light bulb.
Yep.
So, how many organizations do you know of, or is your organization ready to allow people to fail that much? Is it set up to make that happen? So, so failing is one thing. Another thing is supporting people with the right resources. If you're going to be iterating or experimenting around hypotheses, then you need resources. Sometimes that resource is just headspace and time. Sometimes it's other people. Sometimes it's money, other resources. So resources and failure are two key things. And for it to really work, ultimately, the culture in an organization needs to see failure as learning. So I find that there's a big journey for organizations if they really want to become innovative, or get rid of the friction that gets in the way of innovation. The key is to, over time, shift the mindset of the culture. It's not about process or structure, and it has to apply to the whole organization. That getting that mindset right is critical. One thing we realize, and we found a few times in the past, this is a kind of an interesting detail, is if you've got those things right, you're going to start getting a lot of interesting ideas and things happening. Then, at that point, you need to be really clear about whether or not innovation is aligning with your purpose. Because it's not important for innovation to align with strategy. In fact, maybe it's really advantageous that innovation doesn't align with strategy. But if innovation doesn't align with purpose, it shouldn't be happening in the organization. So understanding the role that purpose plays, or clarity of purpose plays, in terms of judging what's useful innovation and what's not useful innovation is also another kind of key ingredient for all that.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's interesting. I was actually watching a video recently with Arianna Huffington. I think she was doing an interview, and one of the things she mentioned was that a lot of organizations have a sort of a skewed notion of what failure is supposed to be about, and pretty much her thesis was failure is not the opposite of success, but it's a stepping stone to success.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and one thing that I wanted to sort of build on is interesting. You brought up fast failing and getting things right. Do you think one thing that sort of makes companies a little bit skeptical in terms of allowing more accountability and flexibility for their employees is about does getting it right or being innovative or does flexibility almost take too long to produce the results that an organization wants? Do you think that might be one of the key reasons why companies have a tendency sometimes to be a bit skeptical of it?
Yeah, I think that can be the case on very rare occasions, but I think it's a real misnomer. This is a situation where you're going to go faster by going slow, and actually the idea that having a bias towards action, jumping in and getting to the right solution right away, it's just not possible. And it's better to be able to iterate and experiment, and you ultimately get the right solution faster. And the difference is, and this is I think really hard for organizations to get really clear about, it's not about getting a solution, it's about getting the right solution to the right problem. Mm-hmm. A lot of organizations are structured, they give promotions and they give people kudos and raises and things like that for just solving problems. But the key is actually to understand the right problem, solve the right problem, and that requires a lot of iteration and a lot of experimentation.
For sure. No, absolutely. And when it comes to when managers are trying to sort of get a sense of how much, quote unquote, control is best, because obviously when it comes to flexibility and accountability, managers, they don't really have the option of being 100% hands off, obviously because they're accountable to their bosses. So when a manager sort of, getting a sense of the landscape of employees and getting a sense of the innovation level or the resourcefulness level, when managers sort of get a sense of that kind of a landscape, what are some ways they can almost gauge how much control is best in order to get the best results from their employees? So how can managers sort of find that balance between being flexible and allowing accountability versus actually having to manage with a more hands-on approach?
Yeah, that question kind of gives me two thoughts. One is, I feel it's valuable to try and meet people where they're at.
Yep.
I feel it's valuable as a leader to have that mantra running in your head all the time.
Yep.
And so a lot of people, call it the art of situational leadership, but you need to know where people are at from a motivation point of view, and a capability point of view. And you need to, and what that allows you to do is get really clear about the balance of challenge and support that needs to show up for that person. And it's really helpful as a leader or a manager to know all your resources that you can bring to bear to support, to get that person on the right part of the spectrum between challenge and support. And it's really important as a leader or a manager to understand that that's very dynamic for people. In fact, some days you just have a bad day and you need a little more support because you couldn't get your kid to eat his breakfast, and that's what's happening that day. So to me, that this idea of how much control is best is it comes down to a little bit of the art of situational leadership, but I also think it comes down to developing the right kind of relationship as a leader, where I would say there's openness and vulnerability in a conversation. So if I want to hone my skills as a leader in the art of situational leadership and know how to show up for people, I'm actually best not to do it on the secret and not actually let them know what's going on. If I can engage the people I'm working with in the process of helping me be a better leader, if I can co-create a way and a style of working with them that works best for them, that they're the experts in themselves. So that's gonna produce the right result as well. So I think that's another dimension to put onto it, is how much do you engage the people you're working with to help you do a better job of working with them.
For sure. It's almost like a bit of a psychological sort of knowledge that managers have to have in terms of being able to gauge, how, what kind of communication style is best in order to get the best out of employees. What type of industry are you in, and is it sort of typical of that particular industry to communicate a certain way, or how do your colleagues who are also managers delegate and communicate, with their respective, whether it's employees or people below them on the corporate chain. So it's a very sort of, it's an interesting psychological dynamic that has to be balanced almost between employees and with managers.
It is, and I think one thing that's really worth noticing, or noting rather, or staying clear, it doesn't matter the size of your company, the age of it, the industry you're in, anything like that. We're dealing with humans.
Yep.
All the time. This is the case in all these situations.
Yep.
And that understanding that and being empathetic and not falling back on norms or ideas in your organization that might not suit your current need right now. We're a tell it like it is organization here, and that's just the way we do it. Well, yeah. That doesn't cut it, because you're dealing with a human that's coming in with their own current situation that needs to be handled appropriately. You're just not going to get good results if you treat everyone the same all the time.
For sure. And just to sort of add on, because the previous sort of thing we were just discussing was how, managers can almost gauge how much, control is necessary, how much hands-on activity, I guess, is necessary from managers, and how they can sort of navigate the landscape. To take it a bit of a step further, how much would you say managers are responsible for creating the culture of engagement, and how much onus and responsibility do you think should be placed on employees themselves to actually take accountability, and not necessarily in the sense that they won't take accountability without direct action or without direct orders from their managers, but how much responsibility do you think employees should inherently have to create almost their own sort of innovative ideas and their own sort of culture and environment of resourcefulness and engagement and accountability and the things that we've been talking about?
Right. Yeah. It's super fascinating, right? Fundamentally, and the most important thing, I think, is this isn't a management exercise, it's an everyone exercise.
Yeah.
So everyone has to own the culture, everyone has to own engagement, and that's just the most important truth in it. However, I do think there's very specific things that, I don't know if I'd say manager or I'd say leader in this context, but leaders need to be the first to step into the gap if no one else is. And part of that, what they're doing is modeling the right behaviors for the organization. So a leader needs to be able to be clear about and be hypersensitive about what she or he is modeling to the organization. So do I need to be modeling vulnerability at this point, or openness, or what should I really be communicating? And the other thing about that is that the reason why I like leaders more than managers, because in this context, leaders emerge from all over the organization.
Yep.
Cultural leaders, leaders who help others get more engaged, they show up all over the place.
Yep.
And a lot of times it's, proximity counts. And if you're on a team with someone and you're out in the field and, it's not the CEO who's going to help this week be good for you. It's the people you're working with directly.
Yeah. And
so, go ahead.
Oh, no, sorry. I was just going to ask a sort of related on the same lines, but do you see a sort of any growing trends in the workforce of, sort of teams managing themselves almost as much as managers are managing teams? Do you see individuals or groups within organizations taking that accountability?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm fascinated by the concept of self-forming teams. It's something at Habanero we have been fooling around with for quite some time now.
Yeah.
We've been working with other organizations in other ways to help them better understand the ingredients that go into creating great teams. And there's some amazing research from the Aristotle project that Google did and things like that are all helping us advance. We spent some time with Zappos in Vegas talking to them about how they do self-forming teams.
Yep.
And I'll say this: I think it's the future.
Yep.
I think the journey to get there requires quite a bit of things to be in place.
Sure.
I really think it's worth any organization of any structure, whether it's command and control or top down or traditional. There's always space to experiment with self-forming teams, and I think if they looked really hard in their organization, they'd realize that some of the highest performing teams were self-forming.
Yeah.
They formed around an idea or a crisis or a situation. We were talking to a very command and control oil and gas company, and they were talking about their response to the wildfires in the Fort McMurray area, and just how it was against every policy and procedure. The wrong people who weren't on the teams together formed together, and with the most incredibly high performing team, to do the right thing for the coworkers. It's a very touching, emotional story.
Yeah.
But that's a self-forming team performing at a very high level. And in an organization like that, to step back and realize, wow, we could do this. It's very inspiring.
Yeah. And sort of one way I wanted to round off the conversation was to ask you about sort of ROI as it pertains to management. So, I mean, whether it's managers creating a sort of culture of accountability, or whether it's self-forming teams, to what you were just mentioning, do you think there's a noticeable ROI when employees have more accountability and when employees have sort of responsibility, on their own accord? Or do you think it's because obviously it's a bit of a complex thing to approach, because I'm sure in certain teams, if you give them flexibility, whether it's personality type or whether it's experience level, you'll have different levels of innovation, different levels of leadership. But I guess in as rounded a way as you can, do you think that there is a noticeable ROI when employers allow accountability and flexibility to their workforce?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I have to admit, personally, I have a funny relationship with the term ROI. I used to be an engineer. I consider myself a recovering engineer, but 20 or so years ago, I used to do ROI calculations on all sorts of things in these massive spreadsheets.
Yeah.
And the one thing I know about the math of it is that, if you are creating some value, even a little bit of value, and the cost is zero, then your ROI is infinite. And the act of actually changing the relationship you have with employees and allowing them more autonomy and accountability and flexibility, that's not something that requires an investment, a financial investment. So right off the bat, I think the return's pretty good if it's infinite.
Yeah.
But not to be sort of silly about the numbers, the truth is actually there is a really, really massive return for organizations, but it's not easy. It's not easy to get there. And what I would caution is not expecting to see massive returns early in the journey.
Yeah.
And if you think about, I had this opportunity a number of years ago to talk to all the senior vice presidents of sales for all the Major League Baseball teams.
Wow.
Except for the Cubs, because they were going through bankruptcy protection.
Okay.
And they were trying to change the culture in their sales organization.
Yep.
And I was talking about autonomy and mastery and developing a sense of purpose and engaging people with their hearts and their minds, and I could tell it wasn't necessarily landing on everyone. And at one point, one of the team's senior vice president of sales stood up and sort of lost his temper, and I realized as I was being berated by him, it hit me like a lightning bolt that this is a person who's run his system with people, with these salespeople, these 21-year-old male baseball lovers. There's an infinite line of them.
Yep.
He didn't have to get to know who they were. He didn't really even know their names. If they didn't make their monthly number, he could get rid of them and get another one.
Yep.
And that system worked to a certain extent. And it does work, but just doesn't work as well. But I realized that the hurdle for someone in that situation who's built a career on that is massive, for them to completely reorient how they work, to become highly empathetic and actually connect with people and understand where they're coming from and create work environments for people to be their best. So it's not that he didn't understand that might be a better way of doing it, but I don't think he could personally see a way for himself to get there.
Right.
And I think there's an element of that natural resistance that exists in lots of people at varying levels. And when you're contemplating, what is the ROI for this, you need to give it time to overcome a lot of that natural built-in friction that will be holding your organization back.
For sure. Well, Stephen, I appreciate you jumping on this episode of the podcast with us. We're going to have you back on in a little while, which is very good. We're going to take a sort of more specific look at this conversation and what the next steps are of it the next time we talk. So we're looking forward to that. For those who want to follow Habanero, make sure to check them out on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter, and you can check out their website at habaneroconsulting.com. If you wanted to follow Great Place to Work Canada as well, you can follow us obviously on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter, and on at greatplacetowork.ca. For those interested in participating and attending our conference taking place on April 25th, obviously we're going to have Stephen join us on a panel discussion of basically what we've been talking about today, which is the policy of non-policy, allowing accountability and flexibility in the workforce, and a lot of other interesting things. So we're looking forward to having Stephen and the other panelists there. If you also are interested, the conference is covered for 6 hours of CPD accreditation. It's been pre-approved by the HRPA here in Toronto. So for all professionals who are coming to our conference to check us out, you'll obviously get your hours of accreditation. So we're looking forward to that. Stephen, I appreciate you jumping on the podcast with us.
Yeah, it's great to chat. Thank you.